Hi guys, welcome back to Modernization Accepted, a podcast by Resolute Software. My name is Yana Vasileva and I am a principal UX and UI designer at Resolute. Today with me I have Zlatina Petrova, who is a co-founder of Brandly Digital, and she's also a fellow UX designer, and she has quite a lot of experience, including working with Silicon Valley startups and also as a consultant. Welcome, Zlati.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today.
It's very nice to have you. Would you like to say something more about yourself and your experience?
Well, I think you presented me in quite a good way already. I have like 12 years of experience working in the field, and I know very well the pains many startups face because I was also part of a startup in LA, and I'm quite excited to be here today because I love the topic about UI and UX a lot. As you know already, our company is specialized in consulting technology companies of any size and also startups. We partner with many venture capital funds, helping to their startups to develop their digital products. And I see the big struggle the industry has regarding UX, UI design, and I'm quite happy to be here and talk about the topic and exchange ideas with Resolute Software.
Yeah, the reason we invited you is that we also at Resolute, we are consultants, not only in design, but in digital modernization in general. We have quite a large team of UX designers and also graphical designers. And we consult on anything from brand identity to UX assessments to hands-on prototyping, user testing, and so on. And well, we see that there is a tendency of the consultant services evolving in the past months or years, let's say. And we wanted to discuss with you to exchange some experience.
It will be a pleasure.
Yeah. So should we start with the biggest challenge or the biggest topic when it comes to working with consultants? What prevents businesses from making the decision to invest in design consultancy?
Well, there is no straightforward answer regarding that topic. It depends a lot on the company size. We have a couple of different company sizes, like small companies and startups on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have the enterprise clients and governmental projects. And the needs of both groups of projects are very, very different one from another. Starting with the startup projects and small companies, from our experience, I've noticed that they lack expertise inside their internal teams. Recently, I have the pleasure to go to Armenia to an accelerator program, the first one organized by the Ministry of High-Tech Innovation and Plug and Play accelerator. And what we discussed with other mentors after the sessions is that many of the starting projects and small companies want to hire a CTO, want to hire a copywriter, a business development guy, which is absolutely amazing, but nobody is thinking about marketing director or design director of any kind. And when they start working on their products and developing, they end up at a point where they have a product, they have a market fit, but they struggle to onboard new clients because their product is a little bit messy. And this is where the role of consultant teams come, or the internal teams of UX UI designers come. And from my point of view, usually they lack the expertise to manage such team, or they don't have the financial resources because, as you know quite well, having an in-house team of designers is quite an expensive thing for many companies, and they try to bootstrap their projects for quite a long time. Here, I think this is a huge advantage for companies providing design services on demand to fill that gap between the business needs of a company and the technological design needs of a product and users, because usually one of the benefits of having such consultants is that you receive very good expertise on demand without a long-term commitment, and this is very flexible and agile methods to work for many startups abroad, and also in Bulgaria we start to use that method as well. With enterprise clients, I might say one of the challenges I've noticed from my experience and the experience of Brandly is the long decision-making process. Usually their products are quite complicated. There are multiple teams working on a product. There are sometimes some misunderstanding between the priorities of each of the teams, and the role of the designer is to try to balance every aspect of the product of the product development and design in general.
And when you were talking about consultants as non-long-term commitment, actually this doesn't mean that the consultant comes in, consults you on this segment of the work, and then goes away. And they don't take, they are not involved into what they're doing, or they are not knowledgeable, or they do not take responsibility outside of this. We have many instances where we have short-term engagements with clients, but they are ongoing. For instance, we can work together for a couple of months every year.
Exactly.
And this it's very nice, because even if you have an in-house team, you know that somewhere out there you have additional manpower, let's say.
Exactly, this is extra manpower.
And usually there is a drawback, or there is resistance from companies to hire consultants, even within the design teams, let's say. They say if a consultant comes in, they don't have our point of view, they don't have our background and so on. But actually we are quite more unbiased.
Exactly.
And we can look outside of organizational politics and the different silos in the team. When we talk about short-term commitment, it just means that we can be there project by project, but it doesn't mean that.
It doesn't. I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree with you, because very often people have internal limits about hiring a consultant. There is a saying everywhere in each industry: nobody likes consultants. But this is not the reality. One of the benefits of working with external service providers in general is not only the fresh perspective they bring on the table, but there is also another aspect, that they have a very vast understanding, usually on multiple industries. And in user experience design specifically, this is a huge advantage, because internal teams are very focused on the product, and they can see the limitations of the product from an outside perspective. And usually consulting companies can leverage the knowledge from another industry that worked quite well as a practice and implement it into your industry, and this way to create something more interesting as a product in the end, and of course something more usable, etc., etc. So there is a huge advantage of working with companies as well. But I think the natural flow of things is when a project starts and it develops well, to start probably working with an external company for design, and at some point when they start to need an ongoing design support, to create their own internal design team. But usually this is quite advanced in the process.
Yeah, and this helps for the smaller companies. This helps to free some of the budget or some of the resources they have for marketing or for business analysis or for anything that they think is more important at that point. Although we always advise that design should come first, but not in all situations. What you said about the expertise from other industries is very correct, but also at Resolute we've seen that since we have quite a lot of expertise working within healthcare with software for healthcare products, we actually see that we have, without reusing patterns and anything from one project to another, we see that it's very beneficial after you have completed or worked on one healthcare project to go and see another one. It not only widens your perspective about things, but it also provides more context for the project that you're working on and for the customer. And in this way we can help them in a way with knowledge they didn't come to us specifically for.
Absolutely. I can relate completely to that. One interesting thing is, from another industry is the gaming industry, for example. I've noticed that people who are working as UX UI designers in the gaming field are quite experienced in creating all the gamifications for certain industries like marketing solutions, because as you know, everybody is trying to attract Generation Z right now. They are quite modern, quite trendy as generation, but this is also generation with attention span up to 3 seconds. So we have, if we want to keep them as users inside our application, we have to include different gamification elements inside. And when you work with classic UI UX designer, don't get me wrong, everybody is creative enough to make gamification, but when the requirement of the businesses make this application more interesting to Generation Z, for example, it's difficult for classical designers or older designers to come up with something super creative as an idea. However, designers working in the gaming industry have lots of ideas and perspectives how to make something super interesting. So I understand completely and relate and agree. Each industry needs good expertise to build better digital products in general.
And talking about gaming, this is more, let's say, B2C products. But we see, strangely, in B2B businesses, even larger organizations, we see at least some sort of resistance for incorporating design in the product delivery process. Strangely, but it happens more often than not for product teams to undervalue the input that the designers will have. Do you think that there is a lack of understanding of what a generalist UX designer can bring to a product development process?
Well, I think that a lot of organizations, especially big organizations, they want to do UX, they want to do user-centered products, but in reality, they don't understand how to make a user-centered product. And also at some point, it's not necessary, but they probably don't understand the role of designer in general, because they're more confident in working with marketing teams, development teams, and they're the process of product development is super straightforward and they can understand the whole process. As you know very well, the design process is more intuitive, it's more creative, and it's difficult to put it into limitations like any other process that is just very logical and organized. And for that reason, I think that quite often big organizations struggle understanding that role in general. They create the internal team, but from my experience, I had a situation with one startup from the Silicon Valley before. They were team full of developers and they hired us to help them with their product design, but they were not ready to work with product designers because the dynamic inside the team was very different. And it was part of our work and workflow to try to educate them what is design, how design looks like, why it is important, and also regarding the development team and regarding the marketing team and the stakeholders, it was important to make them advocate of the whole idea of using design as added value to their product, because this way they can create something more sustainable. And at the end of the day, for each business, the most important thing is to have a product people will use, people like, product that they can sell, which is also quite important thing, because if we circle back to the beginning of the conversation, when we have something messy as a product, it's also difficult to generate revenue from it because nobody would like to use the product in the end. So it's a lot of communication from the design side to make people aware how important the design decision is and to make that path to value the profession more. Usually, I've noticed, I don't know what is the situation from your and how you see it from your expertise, but from my experience, I've seen that usually people start to think about design when the numbers in their Excel sheets doesn't fit with the expectations they had, and they start to think what's wrong, and they ended up coming with the concept that they have to improve the design or to redesign the application or website, of course, because it's also UI design as well. And this is when they start thinking about having design knowledge and help.
Exactly. When the problems start to pile up, they come to design, and usually they're looking for an interface solution for a technical or performance problem, which is something that is very hard to indicate if you are just closed, siloed in your own team.
Yes, absolutely.
Speaking about messiness, a project could be messy in very many ways, but something that maybe is not usually associated with designers. When you say design, you think of creativity, but you don't think of consistency and of systems thinking. And this is something that the designers bring to every project. This is the basis of our work. Absolutely. Recently, we've started working more and more with delivering design systems for our customers. This is something that they've recognized as beneficial, with our help, of course.
Of course.
Yeah, but this is something that they have started to leverage just recently, and I've been for 3 years at Resolute now, and it's a bit strange for me because the fundamentals of design are in consistency. Do you have cases where you have saved a project by a simple solution like introducing a design system?
The design system is a very simple and logical solution, and I usually advocate everyone to start since the beginning when your mess is small. When you start later, usually the mess becomes bigger and it's super difficult to organize it. We had a project in our portfolio which we called the 14 button problem. They literally had 14 variations of the same button, and when I say variations, I don't mean like different states of the button. I mean like different shades of the same blue, different font sizes. One time we had the primary button with caps lock, another time with only small letters, with mixed letters, bold, regular, and nobody had idea why they did that. And when we started working with them, they complained, the business side of the project complained that when they look at the interface, it looks strange. And they asked me, do you have the feeling something's off in the interface? We're not experts, but we think these two buttons are different. And when we went with the CTO through the whole design systems, we figured out that there was no design system. Nobody's following the rule. And every time a designer interfered with the design, they had a different idea how to make that primary button because there was no system to stick on. And in the end, they ended up with 14 buttons. Currently, they have only 3 versions of it, which is quite a huge success to organize the mess. But this is something crucial for the scalability of every product, and also it keeps all the creative ideas organized, which is improving the workflow of engineers as well when the production starts on a later stage. Design systems are important for many reasons. I think it's because of the time limitations companies have when launching new features, when launching the product in general. They are super pressed by different activities. They don't have the time. They lack the resources in human capacity as well, and they just go straight to development. No UX, no testing, nothing. And I think it's a huge problem. But this is great. You see many companies starting to adopt that concept because, it's simple, it's logical, it's not the most designy thing, let's say, but at the same time, again, the role of designer is not only to be creative. The designer should be a good advocate of the design in general and a good communicator, and trying always to balance different aspects and making things logical is a huge part of the role of the product designer in every company, even in every consultant company.
And even when you are an in-house designer, I've had this experience previously. I worked as a designer when I was starting already. We had close collaboration with the development team to create custom components. So in a way, this was a full design system, both with the design file and with the live components, and the developers still wouldn't use them. So this was something that was very peculiar to us until we just understood that there is no common understanding of how the components help. And we had to explain basically, if you write code with syntax errors, it's not going to compile properly. So please use the correct components. This will be the added value, so and so you'll get consistent layouts. You will not get as many bugs.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think also regarding design systems, usually when we work with startup projects who are just starting out and they don't have any idea how to do a design system and how to communicate with designers in general, for them it's a huge communication struggle. Sometimes we advise them to use the pre-made design systems which exist out there, and they're publicly accessible, like the human interface design guidelines, material design guidelines. Also since 2022, I think Uber, they made their design system public as well. So they can just take something which is pre-made with good practices and apply it into their product, and still have a system to which every part of the project can stick on.
Yep, and we know as designers Jacob's law, but maybe people know it inherently without the definition. But usually people spend more time on other websites and not yours, and other applications and not yours. And it's very beneficial to use a convention. So
Yes.
material design is an excellent example for this. At one point earlier, a couple of years ago, everything was based on material design.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons why it's happening is because of the mental models. Usually, many of our listeners of the podcast know, but mental models are something where we think we know how software would work. We have some kind of expectation as user when we see a particular software from a particular industry to function in a very particular way. And when we use conventions, actually we stick to the mental models that users have. And if we try to be super disruptive with the design, which also is not a bad thing, of course it depends on the business strategy and the risk that the company wants to take. But when we present to users something very disruptive, it usually has risks inside. So it's also good to stick to conventions as well because of that.
And this is maybe where we can return to the consultant's role, usually because in the initial phases of collaboration with clients, we don't have as much context as we would have if we are in-house. We stick to the best practices. And this, however, is a double-sided sword, let's say so. Because if you only stick to best practices outside of context, you can only go so far into improving the user experience. Do you think that it's important to have the clients involve the consultants as much as possible? Or is it better if you, what we usually have as a situation is when we get to work with some organization or other, at the initial phases of collaboration, they would try to kind of test us, intentionally hide information from us to see how good we are based on best practices. How would you advise companies to approach working with consultants?
Well, I think it's good to be as transparent as possible, because the consultant is not your enemy. The company is out there to help you build the best product possible. And when you're hiding important information from the consultant, it's like going to a doctor and hiding most of the symptoms you have and waiting for the doctor to, to be a fortune teller and tell you what to do. There is still a super high risk in that. But when you say best practices, did you have a situation where people, when you meet new people and new clients, and they mention we build our softwares based on the best practices, and for us users are very important, and when you ask, okay, can you tell me what are the best practices you follow, and it's not possible for them to mention them. How do you feel about that situation with the buzzword best practices and at the same time the understanding inside the companies?
Usually what we've noticed is that the best practices is what the stakeholders think it's best as a solution. This is 100% of the projects where you don't have design maturity in the team. Where you have some level of design maturity, they know at least the 10 heuristic criteria for evaluation, so they are on the lookout for it. Some of the more mature organizations are even looking for accessibility, which is indeed very nice, and let's say it provides universal experience. But you cannot, it seems like you're hiding behind the word best practice in order to avoid stating that you don't have your requirements well defined and you are not sure where you want to go with the product. This is at least what we've seen so far.
I agree with the same situation. We struggle with the same. When you mentioned accessibility, this is something very interesting. Usually when we start working on a project or when I'm mentoring startups, and I ask a question, how you address accessibility in your designs, usually the answer is negative, like it's not our priority in the moment. Well, there are some projects which are very focused on accessibility matters as well. But accessibility means not only to make the product usable for people who are incapable to read or to listen to something, it's also to make it accessible for the regular general user. Like in Armenia, there's one very interesting startups in the healthcare industry, and they mentioned that they made all the type elements with a bigger font size than usually people use as a standard, because their target audience are doctors, and doctors have some problems with their eyes because they work a lot with documents, and because they are coming from the healthcare industry with a previous experience, they know about that specific of doctors. And they mentioned, we want to make our product very accessible to doctors so they don't struggle with the small typefaces. And it was a very good example for me about knowing your target audience, because one of the challenges of consultants when starting working on a project is that you need some information about the target audience in order to be able to make better design decisions. And most of the time, companies don't track anything. They track the marketing metrics like conversion rate, which is amazing, and this is super important, but you can't explain necessarily the behavior of the target audience only with collected data from Google Analytics, for example. We need to understand the motives of people and why they're doing that and they're not doing something else. And usually we lack that data. I guess you have the same experience as well.
Yeah, in some situations we have actually access to a video capture, I guess is the correct word, of user sessions. We have heat maps. We have quite a lot of information, but it has never been analyzed. Most businesses have bought some tool to monitor the user behavior, but they've only just signed up for it, and that's all. Once they set it up, it just seems too time costly, I think, to make any analysis. Hopefully this will not be a persistent tendency, because these tools have introduced more AI features where you no longer need to watch a full user session. They have just pointed out the problematic parts, for instance. But yeah, usually we work out of very little information, and we're lucky to get some.
This is why it's super important to have designers in your team, no matter if they are in-house designers or consultants, because these people are tough. They went through so many different use cases and scenarios, and in the end came up with something super interesting to users and businesses as well. So this is good expert to have on your side when you develop your product.
Yeah, and usually designers, especially when they are UX designers, there are many directions. You could be a UX writer, you could be a researcher or anything, but in general, UX designers come from diverse backgrounds. Some come from marketing, some come from business, some come from design, and they continue to work as mediators between all the actors in the product development process. So you should not only expect from the designer to sit down at their desk to open Figma and to create layouts and pretty buttons and interactions. There is so much more if you are willing to take advantage of the position of a UX designer.
Absolutely. And also the profession of the product designer. I'm mentioning the profession of the product designer because from my perspective, there is a little bit of a misunderstanding about what is the difference between UI, UX designer and product designer. Usually it is the same person. It's rare when we have separate team of UX designers and separate team of UI designers. This is a privilege for the bigger companies because they have the resources to afford hiring different diverse teams. But for the rest of the companies, usually they need a product designer who combines his expertise, UI, UX. And this is also very interesting role because product designers have both user experience and user interface perspectives, but again with an emphasis on one of the professions. It's rare to find someone who is equally good in UX and UI. Some of the product designers are very good in UX, but a little bit better in the UI, or they feel like they're more visual than doing research and analyzing data. Other product designers are in the opposite direction, but it's also a very interesting profession.
And do you think it's beneficial for UX designers to also understand the business and to be aligned and to be able to communicate clearly what the results from their efforts will be for the business?
It's absolutely crucial. This is something, this is another interesting aspect of the design, that multidisciplinary approach a designer should have in their work. When you create a design, usually the digital product is something that should sell in the end. We should understand clearly the logic of conversion rate optimization, including conversion rate of digital products, mobile applications, or a website, which is something super simple. But still, it requires a lot of knowledge, which is business and marketing related. Also, from my experience, I've noticed that sometimes, including inside my team as well, some designers consider themselves to be more visual and more creative, and they lack the knowledge of marketing and business. But any design is a way to communicate. So when we communicate, it means that it should be understandable for people. And marketing being one of the more important aspects of a business is marketing and sales. So every design should lead to some kind of a call to action. And when we start analyzing the metrics for conversion from user experience or from user interface design, you know very well that we have metrics like retention metrics like daily active users, monthly active users, and usually these metrics are important to investors as well because they show how many people actively use the application, for example, if it's an application, if it's on a mobile app. But at the same time, if the design is not made in an interesting way, like marketing interesting way, then usually these numbers tend to be lower, so it will affect the evaluation of the project, it will affect the sales as well. When the designer understands marketing, it's just a different mindset you have regarding design, and you always think from the perspective of how to make things more interesting to users, how to show clearly the value that the application or the software has for them, and how the company can deliver that value. And when you have these ideas in mind, you take different design decisions, and you're trying not only to make things look nice, which is absolutely a must for every design, but at the same time, you make them functional. And this is the most important thing for business. And I think when we talk about creating or blending the interests and the goals of a business and blending the goals of a user, this is the product design role, which is in between and makes the connection between both groups. And usually when the designer has a marketing and sales perspective, he or she is able to fill that gap and make that connection effectively.
And also, I think it's very important because this means that the designer will have the skill to prove the return on investment for their work. Usually, when you are specifically when you are in-house, you might get fewer resources. Your work might get overlooked because you cannot measure it. Like you don't have a short-term KPI or metric that you can see, and you can immediately prove to management or to your stakeholder that the design works. So it's very important to be aware of different metrics, to know your company's KPIs, because you can pick a KPI that doesn't make sense to a company. They don't want to hear about
absolutely
time on page, for instance.
Time on page.
Yeah. It's important not only for the designers to understand that they have work outside of the pure visual design, but they have also communication and mediation type of work.
Exactly. The design role is to be a good communicator. I always advocate that aspect of the design work when we work with clients or also inside my team, that you're not only creative, or we're not only creative people, but we bring added value to the table and to the product, and we also should try to communicate. And by the way, communicating is very related to the soft skills the person has. As you know, many designers are introverted. They prefer to sit and open the tablet and draw something nicely and beautifully. But when you take the role of UX UI designer or product designer, it doesn't matter how the company label it exactly. You have to learn to communicate properly with different people, to understand the dynamic inside the company. And there is one interesting aspect that affects design decision, and this is the hidden decision maker. Sometimes when you work with lots of companies, you will think that the decision maker is the founder or the stakeholders or the product owner. It depends who is your point of contact inside the company. But sometimes there is somebody in the shadows who is affecting the design decisions and the product development decisions as well. And if you want to achieve more effective results, you have to put some efforts into understanding who is that person, or who is that team, or which is that team affecting taking the major decisions for the direction of the design. And this is all communication skills.
Talking about designers being good communicators, they do not only have to communicate inside the company with other designers, with their stakeholders, with their clients, but they also need to be able to understand and communicate with their users. Do you have a difficult time persuading your clients that you need to perform user testing?
Of course. I think there is if a designer say that they didn't have any problem convincing their clients or stakeholders to conduct a user interview, probably they would lie. At least this is how I see things. Usually user testings are undervaluated in companies because of a couple of reasons. And the first one is, again, the lack of resources. Usually, to be able to conduct a normal user testing session, you need at least five people, as you know very well, according to the standards, and you have to recruit them. If we are building B2C product, it's easy. Probably it would be quite easy to find your target audience. But when you're focusing on building B2B product, and especially when your product is with target audience, let's say like CFOs of companies or any other directors of companies, it's absolutely impossible to find and recruit these people in order to conduct a normal usability test. So it takes quite a long time to find the right people to have a test with, and then to analyze the results. Another thing, and another reason for which I think companies evaluate the user testing session is the quality of the results they get. It's a matter of an expertise of the designer and also experience how to conduct normal user testing session, how to ask the right questions. In these situations, usually we advise designers to ask open-ended questions and to ask questions which don't contain the answer inside them. If the answer is yes or no, then the question should be reformulated in a way to understand what the user think, what the user feel, about using the design, because during these sessions, during these usability sessions, we don't focus on the rough data that we collect usually through other methods like surveys, Google Analytics, heat maps, etc. But we try to understand the behavior of user, why the person is interacting with our solution in that particular way and not in another way. What is the reason behind that? What are the feelings that the person has? And many designers don't have experience conducting that type of interviews, and in these situations I think it's nice to use softwares like usabilitytesting.com. There are many other softwares out there using AI as well that can help you just to insert your link and define through filters what type of users you're looking for, and after a particular time to receive all the video recordings and audio recordings of the usability sessions that the users fulfilled through the platform. And this is a nice way to go and to speed up a little bit the usability testing in general. However, many companies still don't see added value, and I think it's part of the maturity of the company. If you are working with a project like Uber, for example, for them, the usability testings are very important because Uber as an application focuses a lot on making people happy and to provide something which is super easy to use. Same with Spotify. Not only that, but Spotify is one of the good examples of UX for AI because their product is filled with so many AI features we're not aware of. And for them, it's also important to be able to conduct a normal usability, not usability test, but to do a good user experience because their product is AI based. And as you know, the UX there should be a little bit different. And in these circumstances, usually companies prioritize usability testing, but they are very mature in their approach to design in general. I think most of the B2B companies are more tend more to ignore the usability testing than to advocate it. However, for me, it's a matter of maturity of the company.
And also maybe it's a matter of who you are focused on, because sometimes companies tend to develop products for their super users, so for the major accounts that are using them. And this is could be a bit of a trap, because in this way you make the life of everybody else quite difficult.
Exactly. This is true. And don't forget that many companies forget to build their user personas, which is the ABC of user experience in general. And when you focus too much on the perfect user, you miss that the idea of the user persona is to have a general representation of your target audience. And the word general is quite important here, because when we're building something, it has to be accessible for the bigger public, not only for the super user in a specific context.
Exactly. And there is also the thing when there are small companies with a single designer or a small design team or a consultant that tries to introduce user testing. They have to look out for what the stakeholders want to see as final report. Do they want to see numbers, or do they want to see qualitative data? So some of the stakeholders will trust what the users are saying as feedback. Others will only trust the numbers. And it's very useful to be able to show both in a way.
Absolutely. This is why when we are conducting our user research as a phase in the user experience design, we conduct both. We collect the raw data and we collect the qualitative data through all user testing sessions and user interviews. User testing, in my perspective, is a nice way to go for each company, because this is the right way how to build a usable, friendly, user-centered product. But still, we have to be aware as well of the metrics that are important for the business as well, because sometimes design teams struggle with the following aspect. They really want to make something super good for the user, but they forget that in the end of the day, the business metrics should align with the business goals as well. So we have to find some kind of a balance. There is something your story reminds me of a couple of usability testings that I did in the past. And there is a huge advice I would like to give to all fellow designers out there listening to that podcast, that when you start to do a usability test with real users, very often people think that they contribute to the product development, and they start to give a lot of suggestions for new features, for improvements, because they want really to help. It's part of our human nature to want to help other people, because we're a tribe. We support each other one way or another. In these situations, we have two possible approaches. The first one is to analyze the suggestions and improvements that users suggest. The other one is to ignore them at a certain level and then get back to that feedback on a later stage. From my experience, it both work well, but the one that works better is the second one, when you ignore the suggestions of users, because for a couple of reasons, and I would like to explain what are the reasons for that. You are a designer. You understand the product logic quite well. For every single UI element inside that interface, there is a reason why it is placed exactly on that position. Users, on the other hand, they could be tech-savvy people, and probably they are because they're testing a product, but at the same time, they don't understand your context. They don't understand the logic of how the whole application works. And if we focus too much on their suggestions, that probably would lead again to another type of mess that we have, and contradiction between the features that the business wants to implement and work on currently, and the features that the users say. And usually in these situations, I give the following advice. There is a huge difference when we work with real people. There is a huge difference between what thing the user would say, between what the user say they will do, and in the end what the user actually do. So when they start giving suggestions, we are in the phase what the users say they would do, but this is always different from how they are going to use the application. For that reason, I always advise people who are doing usability tests to try to ignore the feedback, like suggesting new features and add-ons and changes of the interface, just to collect the data about how they feel and if they struggle or not to use the application. It was just an interesting thing that I wanted to mention.
I can confirm it from experience. Actually, at previous job, I had the opportunity to go to Norway to see a client and to interview them. And they had so many wishes for new features. And we came back very hyped up, excited, and we said, they want this, this, this. And then we had the business people look at us and say, we have a roadmap, and we have business goals, and we have other clients.
Exactly.
And we have quite a lot of things prioritized before we should do this.
Exactly.
So, yeah, we should observe the users, not necessarily trust them at all times.
Not necessarily. And there is also something called shadow sessions. It is when we observe how people behave while they're using real life our product. And they're also quite interesting and bringing interesting insights. You remind me of a story with a startup company. They had a very interesting product for brokerages in the US. And at some point, we've noticed that some of the metrics started to go down. And again, when metrics start to go down, the business side start asking questions. Why? Is it marketing problem? Is it development problem? Is it a UX problem? What's the problem? And we started digging deeper into that situation. And in the end, we understood that the problem was actually the lack of usability testing. How we discovered that? We discovered that the perfect user using the most the product were people, or the relators. They are showing houses to people. They're always on the move using their mobile phones. The product was web-based. It means it's accessible when you're sitting on your desk and you work on your desk. And this was not the context of usage of the product. So they really liked it, but they struggled using it because their context of usage was different. And when we discovered that was the reason for the drop in the metrics, of course, we made the necessary changes. We developed a mobile version, etc. But it was an interesting observation as well. Something super simple, but again related to understanding the context of your user.
And maybe related also to best practices. Here we are talking about best practices again.
Yes.
But if we say that mobile first or responsive design or accessibility are best practices, if you started with this in mind when designing the product, you shouldn't have had this situation.
Exactly.
Normally, people would think about accessibility as someone who cannot see, cannot hear, cannot speak properly, read properly, something like this, or use both their hands or the digits and so on. But actually, all of the users of accessible design are actually all of us, because we normally multitask, we use different devices, we interact with devices in very different contexts. So in a way, a mother who is on the bus and has to hold the child with one hand and work on the mobile with one hand is the same as a person who has temporary permanent disability and cannot use both their hands.
Absolutely. And also if we think for something super simple as an application like Nike Running App, I'm personally a big fan of Nike Running App, you're using the app while you're running.
Mm-hmm.
It should be very accessible. Again, we talk about the context of usage of a technology. Accessibility is a hot topic, like a hot potato, in our industry for lots of time, but it will become hotter since from next year, from 2025, when an accessibility act would be accepted in European Union, and like GDPR, every single digital product or website should be compliant with accessibility standards. So we, one way or another, we will end up talking and thinking about accessibility. Usually when we mention accessibility practices, there are lots of standards out there. It's just a matter of thinking, reading a little bit, and also for designers, Figma has lots of different plugins for accessibility that measure the contrast ratio, that measure the font size, for example, and depending what standard exactly you would like to test. So it's again a matter of reading, installing the plugin, and check your designs. They give suggestions how to improve them, so it's not a rocket science to build something accessible. Regarding development, it's a bit more specific, but again, Google and Apple have guidelines for building accessibility applications with more voice controls, for example, or explanation how to build interfaces where users can adapt the font size of an application. So everything is out there. We just have to grab it and start implementing it.
Yeah, and specifically about accessibility, I think we will have to learn continuously, because we have, in collaboration with the development teams, we have responsibility to look out for everything. This doesn't mean only the way that the application works, but the way it communicates purely verbally. For instance, if you have complex terminology, this will be very difficult. If you are developing a educational tool, for instance,
Exactly.
There are many children with dyslexia, and not only children, but and the developers, as front-enders, have to adopt this approach to always start with accessible front-end coding. It shouldn't be something that comes afterwards.
Exactly. It should be something like design systems. It should start from the beginning.
And another hot topic.
We started with the hot topics.
This is the hottest topic of them all. You have quite a lot of experience with something that is new to me, and this is UX and UI for AI.
Yes.
Could you tell us, you have at Brandley's specifically, you talk about this, but could you tell us about your experience so far?
Yes, it's a quite new topic, and we feel super proud in our team that we are one of the pioneers companies and experts starting talking about the difference between the classical way of doing UX, UI, and the way we should think about it when we are building AI-based products. One of the major differences between the classical approach and new approach is related to how the artificial intelligence works. What I mean by that, you are aware very well, everybody of you, including our listeners, that AI has couple of very interesting specifics. The first one is this personalization. We know that AI can personalize data, can process data, can analyze data, and this is something that affects the user experience design in the following way. We talk here about dynamic interfaces most of the time. We should, when we think about personalization, we should think about how to make it clear to users that there are AI features going on. We should be transparent with people how the AI is using their data, how the AI is collecting their data, why they see some stuff that other people don't see. For example, with social media, there is also a lot of AI algorithms going on and analyzing our preferences, like Instagram, for example. All the reels that we see are shown based on our behavior and interactions with applications, and this is AI algorithms which analyze our data and proceed it forward. So when we talk about UX, there are a couple of things to be aware of. In personalization, we have basic recommendation as a specific of the AI, which is to show people and show users different suggestions based on their interest or their behavior. Like the example that I did with the social media is exactly the same thing. The other thing is to have aligned interfaces where content dynamically adapts based on the user behavior and preferences. Like, for example, we imagine a newspaper, an online media website. And this is probably going to cause a lot of search engine optimization problems, but imagine a scenario when the heading of the article changes dynamically for each user based on the preferences and interests that the user has. Mm-hmm. This is something super new, and it will develop in the following years as a trend in design for sure. It's the same with the interface elements of a website. We can talk here about websites that reorganize sections and the information is inside sections dynamically when people interact with them, or even UI interface on a web application or mobile application. So here we still explore as people, but when we have personalization, the user experience should be a little bit approached differently. Another thing is control and transparency. This is one of the hugest gaps recently from my experience in terms of design, because when we talk about transparency and control, it means that we should show into the interface of users the possibility for them to control some of the settings of how the AI model behind the application works and collects data. They should be able at any certain point to give feedback for what works, what doesn't work, to be able to switch on, switch off particular aspects of their preferences. Also, when we have, for example, applications in the field, when I say applications, I mean web applications in the field of communication, like call center applications, because as you know, call centers are one of the first industries who adopted AI quite fast after the emergence of ChatGPT and OpenAI. ChatGPT is just a generative chat that we know. But when you have your employees working with the software, they have to prompt engineering in many of these softwares in the right way. They should also build a particular logic in the communication so these applications can work on the client side, and their clients are the end clients. And all of that requires very clear UX, because all these processes are super complicated. And also, we have to provide the users the capability to control and to make it easy for them to understand how to control the interface, how to understand transparently how the AI works. And this is another thing that we should be aware when we're building UX or we're making AI for application which is AI based.
And recently we've had quite a lot of new functionalities available for designers in the software that we're using, both released by Figma and by Adobe. These have been met with mixed feelings by the design community. How do you feel about having AI functionalities available to you when you do design?
I think it's inevitable. This is the future, and I don't want to open the topic about the future of the profession of the designer in general, but with all the emerging AI like technology, and I don't refer to generative AI tools that we use and we know, we have to adapt. There are a lot of tools out there who are doing UX quite well. Even we did inside our team, because we are also experienced in AI automations, we did a simulation of a usability testing session, focus group between couple of custom GPT elements which were simulated to talk one to another and come up with interesting ideas regarding an interface. And it's possible. And do you know what was the interesting thing? That when we ran that test with real people, actually, they've noticed exactly the same things. So in our days, it's impossible to continue doing design without AI. It's a matter of time for AI to change the profession entirely. But I think that AI won't replace people, but people who use AI will replace those who don't. So this is basically the future of design, and AI can help you do your work faster and better, but not replace your skills as a designer. So we should not be afraid of that.
After all, we are designing for humans, so we cannot escape the human element in the design process.
Never. I agree.
Yep. Thank you, Zlati, for the interesting discussion. If you have any comments, of course, you can leave them below. And if you like the podcast, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us, listen to us on Spotify and Apple Podcast. See you next time.